I could no longer doubt the doom prepared for me by monkish ingenuity and torture. My congiants of the pit had become known to the inquestial agents. The pit, whose horrors had been destined for so bold Tereskins as myself. The pit, typical of hell, and regarded by rumor as the ultimate thrill of their punishments. Hi, my name is Sierra, and do you like gory, off-putting mystery? Well, if you did enjoy the expert in the beginning, you will like this short story by Edgar Allan Poe called The Pit and The Pendulum. Now, Edgar Allan Poe, his type of writing is very unique in his own kind of way. Now, with Edgar Allan Poe, he is known for not naming the characters, leaving plot holes sometimes in his stories, making you figure out what happened for that character to get there and how he's going to get out of that situation. And a lot of the times the main character usually is nameless and has some type of mental illness. And in The Pit and The Pendulum, there is a man who is always in a staring contest with death, but yet seems to bat an eyelash and always stays fearless. He is an optimistic but mentally distorted soul. And in the story, he figures out how to get out of a heated situation. And in this story, the situation does take place in a torture dungeon. And in the beginning of the story, he is in trial, and Edgar Allan Poe doesn't intentionally mention why he is there. But throughout the story, a lot of the time, Spanish Inquisition is mentioned. And Spanish Inquisition is usually around the time in the 15th century in Spain, is where they would bring converted Muslims and Jews into court, and they would see if they were sincere to their new religion. And of course, if they found out that they weren't, they would be sentenced to death and put into a torture chamber, and basically sentenced to death until they were killed. The man is the protagonist in the story, and he is left nameless, which is Edgar Allan Poe is used to doing, and he has two antagonists, one of the main ones being the darkness. Now, in the torture chamber, most of the story takes place in the darkness, leaving the man to wander around and figure out what's going on around him and what he needs to do to leave and escape the situation. And the second one, which is also very important, are rats. Edgar Allan Poe uses the rats in the situation to portray the story and to sway the story into a certain direction is very unique, and his style of writing also plays into that as well. Now, the way Poe actually manipulates the two antagonists and plays them into the story makes death a very important theme in the actual story, seeing how throughout in the darkness he gets into many situations, to near-death situations, to where he's not almost able to escape. But also, the man always does escape it, which is a very important thing to recognize and acknowledge in a Poe story. And in The Pit and The Pendulum, Poe portrays more than just a man that has been thrown into a torture chamber to be left to die, but more of a lesson, because even though the man was probably a converted Jew or a Muslim, he never stopped or wanted to give up or just lay there and die and not fight for what he actually wanted. And in a Poe story, I feel like a sense of hope is not usually very apparent in a lot of his stories, and in this story you can definitely see the man fighting for what he wants, and he just does not give up at all unless that is just his final resort. Poe also makes the man's mental capacity very apparent in the story, reading where you can see where something is a bit off, and Poe usually does that where he throws a mental illness into his main character into the story. And reading, you can see that something is off and something is wrong, and that is not until the very middle or end of the story, which sways your whole perception on the actual story and how that man got there and how he's able to get out of that situation. Now, how Poe decides to use his creative ability to actually end the story is, to me, the best part of the story. Now, even though Poe's style of writing can be a bit challenging to read, it is definitely a reward in itself, because even throughout the story and seeing what the protagonist goes through and the antagonist, and how the character actually uses the antagonist to his ability, not only the darkness but the rats. Poe just really plays it into perspective for the reader to find out actually what's happening and what's going on. So if you are the type of person who loves eerie, like heart-wrenching mystery, I think The Pit and The Pendulum is a great suggestion for you. And also Poe's stories in general, seeing how they go along with the same type of flow as story-wise and how he portrays his story. Poe is a very unique writer, and he can take you there mentally with his stories. Not only just a story and you reading it, but the way he describes things, and even the character, the protagonist, how he describes his stories and what's going on in his head and how he's getting around and how things look. It paints a very visual picture of what's going on and almost makes you feel like you are there and you are feeling what he's going through, and just a very physical sense of what's going on. So if you like this, then I suggest that you should check out The Pit and the Pendulum.